Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you, everybody. It's quite a challenge to talk today by you because of your great speech yesterday, but so I will try to do my best. Congratulations, it was really, really good, very inspiring. So do I have a pass a slide, please? So, and thank you, Gustavo, for the invitation and the opportunity to share what we are doing in Chile in the National Artificial Intelligence Research Center. So what I want to share with you is about so first of all, what does it mean to work about AI in Latin America and Caribbean? Second, what we have done with some projects, that it's Latin American AI Index and the LATAM GPT project, and some conclusions. And I'm sorry because of the ugliness of the presentation, and also it has some Spanglish slides, but I think I will try to do it. So first of all, this is a map that probably you have seen, but it's upwards. It's from the Stanford AI Index, and it shows where does the notable AI models come in the last 21 years. And there are only two models that has come from, one in Argentina in 2004 and one from Australia in 2022. So, and this has a lot to do with what Mateo said about computing capacities. You can make a correlation that is strictly direct between where are the power and where the models are coming from. Well, and they are coming from mainly from the States, but also China and Europe in the last year, and mostly from the industry. So 42 of the models in 2024 comes from industry, and well, that's because of it has getting more and more expensive. So the family of models of Gemini, for example, costed around $200 million only in marginal training costs. That don't consider the cost that they already have, the infrastructure that it built over the model. Grok costed $100 million only for training in marginal training cost. But it's not only about computing, it has a lot to do also with, for example, AI publications. So Latin America and Caribbean represents 1.66% of the computer science publications in the last year, and less than 0.05% of the granted AI patents in the last year. And it has been that way in the last 15 years. And when you see, and this is very interesting, this is something that we have made in the last 2 months, it's comparing the performance of large language models in several topics and the ratio between the hallucination when you consider LATAM against US and Europe. And what you see is that all the models in all the topics tends to hallucinate more about LATAM than any other topic. And that has a lot to do with the lack of computing data and talent that it's involved in the development of this model. So our diagnosis when we started this is that Latin American Caribbean is completely irrelevant in the AI landscape. You have to start from there if you want to make something. The second is there was no data available to understand what was really going on in the region, where the people, what were they doing, etc. There were some isolated efforts, very interesting efforts, isolated in isolated communities inside countries and between countries. Something that we have discovered in the Latin American AI Index is that we tend to collaborate much more north than between countries in Latin American Caribbean. But there was a huge common interest in changing the situation through radical collaboration. So I want to share 2 projects that we have been coordinating in the last 2 years that are based in this idea of radical collaboration. So the first one is this, the Latin American AI Index, or Índice Latinoamericano de Inteligencia Artificial, that we have released the 3rd version last Friday with the support of many, many organizations. So we have here sponsors, we have multilateral organizations, we have data organizations. And I want to share some of the highlights that we have found in the last version. So this is very obvious for people from Latin American Caribbean, but not so obvious for people that it's not in Latin American Caribbean. It's that we are there's a lot of variety of ecosystems. So we have like pioneers like Chile, Brazil, or Uruguay. You have adoptants like Colombia or Mexico, and you have explorers, that, for example, El Salvador or Paraguay. So it's not the same. It's not a country in the south of the state with different ecosystems. And you have a huge concentration on knowledge. Like of this 1.66% that I've shown of computer science applications, most of them are concentrated in Brazil, Mexico. 72% is there, and 90% in Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. But when you go to the main track, A+ publications in conference, 50% come from Brazil and 20% come from Chile. So it's a very, very concentrated area. And that leads to a lack of talent, of any talent. So this compares the concentration, relative concentration of AI talent in industry. And in the left, you see that, okay, we have grown in the last 8 years. But when you compare with the Northern Global, we are not even much where the countries of the Northern Global were 8 years ago. And the gap is getting wider and bigger. And well, this shows it more clearly. All the countries in Latin America and Caribbean are net exporters of talent. So each year, all the countries are losing more talent than they are producing in Latin America. And probably this has to do with this paradox of adoption. So when you see that the market share of AI applications based on Gen AI is 20% Latin American Caribbean against the 80% of the rest of the world, and we are around 6.2 of the global GDP, you only have 1.2% of the private investment in the region. So you have a region that has a lot of interest and adoption from people on Gen AI, but on the other hand, you don't have even the same proportion of private investment of the GDP that we are representing. So this challenge of adoption, we are addressing through the development of capability. And this is the other project that I want to share with you, is LatamGPT. LatamGPT is basically one open large language model for and from Latin American Caribbean. So it's based in this idea of radical collaboration, and we didn't start it this way. We started in another way, and finally we finished collaborating with AWS or the Data Observatory or the Development Bank of Latin America. But we have these key partners that gave us compute capacity, capabilities, technical abilities, and well, the most important thing is data. So today we have 50 institutions and 150 people working in this project. Most of these institutions are giving us, or not giving, but sharing with us with data. So today we have these institutions from 15 countries in the region, and we have collected a huge data set that is today 10 terabytes of unedited data about Latin American Caribbean, 8 terabytes that are in Spanish and Portuguese, and 2 terabytes that are in English, because obviously there's some data in English. But we also have 18 terabytes of the still data that was in open source data sets. And well, the data mostly don't come, and this is very interesting for me also, that Chile is not the leading country here. And it's not even Brazil that is the biggest, that come from Mexico and Argentina, and then Chile, Colombia, and Brazil. And we have a wide different combination of topics that goes from politics to indigenous peoples. And it's very interesting that we don't have enough data of indigenous people, and that's something that we have to address, and we are working with another projects in that way. So we are organized in 3 groups. The first one is data, that what I have shown. The second one is pre-training, and we are training with a continuous pre-training technique based on Llama 3.1. AWS gave us some access to clusters, and we have a research cluster that we have used to make some experiments, and now we are in our second instance of the training clusters, that is 48 G5, 48 large of H200. It's very generous from them. We have an alliance with NVIDIA and access to NEM and other tools, and we have incorporated the team of Gen AI that has developed, for example, Falcon or Sea Lion models and other sovereign models in other work. So this is showing what we are doing, distributed training in 16 GPUs. Well, I don't understand really that, but I wanted to show. So we are doing something that looks serious. And this is what specifically we are doing. So most of the experiments that we are doing is to understand which one is the best recipe to improve the performance. And when I say performance, I'm talking about this hallucination ratio that we have seen in the other state-of-the-art models. And finally, the post-training group, post-training or alignment, we have a group that is working with benchmarks. There's no benchmarks about Latin American Caribbean. So we are making about six new benchmarks with 4 universities. We have a benchmark experimentation team. We have a chatbot arena that is working on alignment with the data set that we are building. So after we have this version that we are training, actually, we will align that with the data set that we are building. And we are also working with some alignment workshops with public servants to understand the performance in specific contexts where we think it would be better, for example, for public servants. And crowdsourcing alignment with a new platform that is CopuChat. It's basically, today we have 50K interactions. It's kind of chatbot to understand where the people is going or what the people is going to ask the chatbot. We have this synthetic data generation process based on this technique of people generation that allows the construction of use cases guided by an input document. So that allows us to have many different interaction cases. And we have these open resources that are, well, available today to anyone who wants to work and to collaborate with us. So the expected outcomes of this is an open source LLM of 70 billion parameters that will be available in December. This open training dataset is based on Apache 2 license with some restrictions for commercial use, upskilling across, new benchmarks, and this collaborative paper about data governance and data grazing that we are working today. So some final thoughts. After all this effort, we're still irrelevant, but we are trying to get less irrelevant. There's tons of data in many institutions. And the principal challenge is data cleansing, how we can put this data in production. And that's what we are working for. Something that I wanted to mention is the idea of sovereignty today can be an obstacle, especially in research, computing, and data sharing. So there's this idea of, I want to have this data, this compute, or this researcher for my country. It can be an obstacle if you want to go in this radical collaboration because you need scale. Latin America needs scale. So you can have a Latin American sovereign idea, but when you go national level, that can be an obstacle if you want to enhance some of it. And finally, there's an opportunity of a regional normative framework that can, well, be oriented to enhance some common challenges, but also to make a common market as they have made in Europe. So thanks a lot for your attention, and we're happy to answer questions.